America built hundreds of dream destinations that the world eventually stopped dreaming about. Some closed overnight, some faded over decades. All of them are still out there, rusting, overgrown, and waiting. These are 10 abandoned tourist destinations in America you forgot about. Number 10, Ghost Town in the Sky, Maggie Valley, North Carolina. Getting to Ghost Town in the Sky was half the attraction. The park sat at the top of a 3,364-foot mountain in Maggie Valley, North Carolina, and reaching it required either a chairlift or a pair of incline railways, not because the park wanted to be dramatic about it, but because there was genuinely no other practical way up. Whatever else you thought about the place, you had to respect the commitment to the bit. Ghost Town in the Sky opened in 1961 and operated as a Wild West theme park at a genuine mountain altitude, with staged gunfights, saloons, roller coasters, a Native American village, and the kind of kitschy Americana that the American South did extremely well in the 1960s and 1970s. At its peak, it drew hundreds of thousands of visitors from across the Southeast who wanted to combine mountain scenery with a shootout and a churro. The combination was more appealing than it sounds. The park's troubles accumulated over decades of changing ownership, aging infrastructure, and the particular challenge of maintaining a theme park on a mountain that receives significant ice, wind, and rain. Rides on a mountaintop age differently from rides at sea level, and the cost of maintaining equipment at altitude, when every part, every tool, and every maintenance worker has to go up the mountain, adds up in ways that flatter financial projections consistently fail to account for. Ghost Town in the Sky closed in 2002, opened briefly under new management in 2007, closed again in 2009 after a mudslide damaged the incline railway, and by the 2010s was sitting largely abandoned on its mountaintop with no clear path to revival. The chairlift equipment deteriorated without maintenance. The Old West storefronts, the saloon fronts, the jail, the general store, weathered through multiple Appalachian winters without anyone keeping them up. The mountain itself remained as strikingly beautiful as it always was, which made the abandoned structures on top of it even more striking to look at. Nature was patient, the buildings were not. As of the mid-2020s, various redevelopment proposals have been floated for the property over the years, including a proposed zip-line adventure park and various mixed-use development concepts. None have fully materialized into construction. Ghost Town in the Sky remains one of the more unusual abandoned destinations in the American Southeast, both because of what it was and because getting there still requires the kind of commitment that most tourist destinations have long since engineered away. Number 9, Lake Shawnee Amusement Park, Mercer County, West Virginia. Before there was a theme park at Lake Shawnee, there was a farm. Before there was a farm, there was a settlement. And before that settlement, there was a Native American burial ground. A fact that the entrepreneur who bought the land in the 1920s to build an amusement park apparently decided to work around rather than reckon with. Lake Shawnee Amusement Park opened sometime in the 1920s, featuring a Ferris wheel, a swing carousel, a large swimming pool, and the classic collection of mid-century amusement park rides that drew families from the surrounding West Virginia hills. It was a pleasant regional attraction, and for a few decades, it worked. Then the accidents started accumulating. A young girl was struck by a truck while playing on the swings. A boy drowned in the pool. Other incidents followed. By 1966, the park had closed permanently, and the land returned to quiet. In the 1980s, a man named Gaylord White bought the property with plans to renovate it. When construction began, workers found human remains and Native American artifacts. The renovation was abandoned. The original park equipment, the swing ride, the Ferris wheel, some of the original structures, remained largely in place, which is part of what makes Lake Shawnee genuinely unusual. Most abandoned amusement parks decay into unrecognizable ruins. Lake Shawnee's original rides are still visible, still standing to varying degrees, still identifiable for what they once were. The property is currently privately owned and offers ghost tours and special events. It has been featured on paranormal investigation programs. The dark history that preceded the park has been well documented, and the place draws visitors specifically because of, not despite, what happened there. It is one of the stranger cases of abandoned tourist infrastructure becoming tourist infrastructure again, just for a different kind of tourist. Number 8, Dogpatch USA, Newton County, Arkansas. Dogpatch USA was built on an idea that seemed reasonable at the time: The Lil Abner comic strip, created by cartoonist Al Cap in 1934 and running until 1977, was a nationally known cultural institution with a recognizable cast of characters and a distinctive fictional setting, the hillbilly mountain town of Dogpatch, Kentucky. In 1968, a group of Arkansas investors decided that the Ozark Mountains of Newton County looked enough like Dogpatch to build an actual dog patch, and that people would come. The park opened in 1968, featuring trout fishing, log cabins, crafts, live entertainment, and character actors playing Abner Yoakum, Daisy May, Mammy and Pappy Yoakum, and the rest of the Dogpatch cast. It was not a roller coaster park. It was more of a heritage and comedy destination, which is a narrower market than Al Cap's readership might have implied. The park was genuinely regional in its appeal, drawing visitors from the surrounding Ozark states, and it operated, with varying degrees of success, for 25 years. By the early 1990s, Al Cap was dead. His comic strip was long out of print, and the generation of Americans who had grown up with Lil Abner was aging out of the theme park demographic. Dogpatch USA closed in 1993. The owners subsequently attempted to sell the property through various channels, including, at some point, eBay, an asking price on a decaying hillbilly theme park in rural Arkansas that attracted, by most accounts, zero serious offers. The property sat abandoned for years, its log cabins and Dogpatch-themed character buildings slowly deteriorating into the Ozark landscape at a pace that the Arkansas climate enthusiastically supports. The setting, it must be said, remains genuinely beautiful. A valley in the Newton County Ozarks, surrounded by forest and limestone bluffs, and the kind of dramatic natural scenery that made the original location choice sensible, even if the theme park concept built on top of it did not achieve its intended longevity. In 2021, Johnny Morris, the founder of Bass Pro Shops and the man who turned outdoor retail into something resembling an entertainment experience in its own right, purchased the approximately 400-acre property with announced plans to develop it into a nature park. Morris had previously developed Big Cedar Lodge in Ridgedale, Missouri, into a widely praised wilderness resort destination, so there was reason to take his Dogpatch acquisition seriously as a project rather than a real estate holding. Whether the specific development he has in mind for Newton County has moved meaningfully toward completion since the purchase announcement is a question the Ozarks are still watching. The land is striking regardless of what eventually gets built on it. Number 7. Holy Land USA, Waterbury, Connecticut. John Baptist Greco was a devout Catholic attorney from Waterbury, Connecticut, who had a vision. He wanted to build a biblical theme park on Pine Hill, overlooking the city, where visitors could walk through scale replicas of ancient Jerusalem and Bethlehem and engage with Scripture in a physical, experiential way. He started construction in 1956, doing much of the work himself and with the help of volunteers, using donated scrap metal and whatever materials could be obtained inexpensively. Holy Land USA opened in 1958 and ran for decades, eventually growing to cover 17 acres of hilltop terrain, with more than 200 miniature religious structures and dioramas, small replicas of scenes from the Bible, catacombs, a nativity, a cross visible from across the city. At its peak in the 1960s and 1970s, the park drew up to 40,000 visitors per year, which is an impressive number for a self-built religious installation in Connecticut. Admission was free. When Greco died in 1986, the park effectively died with him. The nuns who had been caretaking the property kept it limping along informally, but maintenance without consistent funding is a slow form of closure. The park shut permanently in 1984, 2 years before Greco's death, reflecting a decline that preceded the end. The hillside structures began to deteriorate through Connecticut's wet winters and summer overgrowth. In 2010, a teenager was murdered on the grounds of the abandoned park, a crime that generated renewed public attention to the site and accelerated the question of what should be done with it. The property was eventually sold in 2013 for $350,000 to Friends of Holy Land USA, a group that committed to keeping the site dedicated to religious purposes. Restoration work has proceeded slowly since. The large cross on the hilltop remains visible from across Waterbury. The rest of the site exists in a state somewhere between abandoned and partially restored that does not resolve cleanly into either category. Number 6. Chippewa Lake Amusement Park, Medina County, Ohio. Chippewa Lake. Amusement Park had one of the longest runs of any amusement park in American history before it stopped running entirely. It opened in 1878 as a modest resort, featuring a ballroom, a steamboat on the lake, and a roller coaster that required manual labor to reset after every ride, a feature that presumably shaped the ride operator's views on overtime pay. Over the following century, it expanded and modernized, adding a Ferris wheel, a tumblebug, a Big Dipper wooden coaster, a hotel, fast food stands, and the full complement of mid-century amusement park infrastructure. The park operated continuously for 100 years. When Continental Business Enterprises took over in 1969, the new owners made ambitious plans for expansion and modernization that local interest failed to support. By 1978, after a century of operation, Chippewa Lake closed its gates. What happened next is what distinguishes Chippewa Lake from most abandoned amusement parks. The rides were not removed. The structures were not demolished. The property was not cleared and redeveloped. The park was simply left. For decades, the Big Dipper roller coaster stood in the forest as trees grew through its structure. The carousel house remained standing. The hotel decayed into the landscape. Nature did what Ohio nature does with an unattended theme park in a wet climate. It took everything back, slowly, comprehensively, with the patience that only ecosystems can sustain. For urban explorers and ruin photographers, Chippewa Lake became one of the iconic American sites during the 2000s and 2010s, a place where a century of leisure infrastructure was being quietly absorbed by forest in real time, with the results of that process visible and documentable in ways that most abandoned places do not permit. A roller coaster frame with trees growing through its support structure is an image that requires no caption. It explains itself completely. Much of what was there has deteriorated beyond recognition or been removed in recent years, and access to the property has been complicated by its private ownership and the safety concerns that accompany heavily decayed structural elements. The site does not welcome visitors the way Lake Shawnee does, but Chippewa Lake retains its reputation among people who document abandoned American places as a landmark of the category. A park that ran for 100 years, stopped, and then let nature make the point about what permanence actually means. Number 5. Joyland Amusement Park, Wichita, Kansas. The Ottaway family opened Joyland Amusement Park in Wichita on June 12, 1949, with the kind of optimism that post-war American families were good at sustaining. The park grew over the following decades into a substantial regional attraction featuring a 75-foot wooden roller coaster, the roller coaster, which lacked a more specific name but did not lack for speed, a Ferris wheel, an octopus ride, a tilt-a-whirl, a merry-go-round, and the Wacky Shack dark ride that became a specific object of affection for the Wichita families who grew up riding it. At its best, Joyland was the kind of local amusement park that a mid-size American city builds its summer memories around. Not a national destination, not a premium brand, just a reliably fun place that multiple generations of the same family visited in the same parking lot on summer Saturday afternoons. That is its own category of institution, and Joyland held it for more than 50 years. By the late 1990s, financial problems, vandalism, and the particular challenge of maintaining aging wooden ride infrastructure without the revenue to justify it had begun to win. The park closed in 2004. The Wichita community's reaction to the closure was the kind of grief that surrounds the loss of something that people realized they loved more than they had acknowledged while it was still available. The site sat largely intact for years after the closure, which is part of what made it compelling and also part of what made it heartbreaking. The roller coaster frame was visible from nearby streets. The Wacky Shack dark ride still stood, its exterior faded but structurally present. The original Joyland sign remained legible long enough for multiple generations of photographers to document it. You can drive by and see the bones of it, one longtime Wichita resident told a local newspaper in the years following closure, describing the particular kind of monument that a failed regional park becomes when it is left in its original location rather than demolished. It is a monument to nothing in particular except the passage of time and the specific way that a community's childhood memories look when the physical place that held them starts falling apart. Fire, multiple incidents of vandalism, and the reliable deterioration of Kansas weather accelerated the site's decline through the 2000s and 2010s. The carousel, A 1949 Spillman carousel that was one of the park's most beloved features was donated and eventually moved to preservation. Other individual pieces found new homes with collectors and museums. The roller coaster structure was demolished. The Wacky Shack eventually came down. The fenced, overgrown site in South Wichita that was once Joyland is still there, still waiting to be something else, and still the subject of the kind of community attachment that regional parks generate and outlast. Number 4, Heritage USA, Fort Mill, South Carolina. Heritage USA was built by Jim and Tammy Backer, the televangelists who ran the PTL, Praise the Lord network in the late 1970s and 1980s, as a Christian resort and theme park in Fort Mill, South Carolina. The scale was extraordinary for what it was, a 2,300-acre complex that included a water park, a shopping district, hotels, residential condominiums, a television production facility, campsites, and various entertainment venues, all themed around Christian family values and the PTL brand. By 1986, Heritage USA was drawing close to 6 million visitors per year, making it one of the 3 most visited theme parks in the United States at the time, behind only Walt Disney World and Disneyland. That number is not a misprint. A religious theme park in South Carolina was, for a period in the mid-1980s, one of the most successful tourist destinations in America. The collapse was fast and total. In 1987, it emerged that Jim Backer had been involved in a sexual encounter with a 21-year-old church secretary named Jessica Hahn in 1980, and that PTL funds had been used to pay for her silence. Federal fraud charges followed, related to the sale of vacation timeshares at Heritage USA that had been dramatically oversold. Backer was convicted in 1989 and sentenced to 45 years in prison, later reduced significantly on appeal. He ultimately served about 5 years. Hurricane Hugo damaged the property significantly in 1989, compounding the financial collapse. Heritage USA closed. The 2,300 acres were left largely in place, and the combination of a scandal that defined an era, a biblical scale of financial fraud, and a genuine physical landscape of abandoned religious kitsch made the site one of the most written about abandoned properties in America. Various portions of the property have been used by other organizations over the decades. Morning Star Ministries, a Christian organization, has operated from part of the site and has announced plans for residential development. Much of the original Heritage USA infrastructure remains in various states of decay. Number 3, the Salton Sea. Riverside and Imperial Counties, California. The Salton Sea was not designed to exist. In 1905, an irrigation canal break sent Colorado River water flowing into the Salton Sink, a below-sea-level basin in the Southern California desert, for nearly 2 years before engineers stopped it. The result was an accidental lake in the middle of the Mojave Desert, 35 miles long and 15 miles wide, located below sea level in one of the hottest regions of the country. Developers, sensing opportunity where most people saw accident, turned it into a resort destination. Through the 1950s and early 1960s, the Salton Sea became one of the most popular recreation destinations in California, marketed as the California Riviera and later described in tourist brochures as the next Palm Springs. The water was warm, the fishing was excellent, tilapia and corvina thrived, and the proximity to Los Angeles made it accessible for weekend trips. Frank Sinatra performed there. The Beach Boys recorded nearby. The Salton Sea was, for a decade or so, genuinely fashionable. What the developers did not account for was the hydrology. The Salton Sea has no natural outlet. Everything that flows in stays in. Agricultural runoff from surrounding farms brought pesticides, fertilizers, and salts that accumulated in the water over decades. The salinity rose past ocean levels. Fish began dying in massive numbers, their carcasses washing onto beaches. Birds followed. The smell that accompanied these events is described by people who experienced it in terms that suggest it was not subtle. By the 1980s, the resorts were closing. By the 1990s, towns like Bombay Beach and Desert Shores were largely abandoned. What remains today is genuinely surreal and genuinely worth seeing, even, especially, in its current state. Old motel signs still advertise room rates from the 1970s in fonts that haven't been used since the Carter administration. The beaches are composed in significant part of fish bones and barnacle-encrusted tilapia carcasses, which gives them a texture and a sound underfoot that no marketing campaign would ever describe accurately. Half-submerged structures jut from the waterline at Bombay Beach. The smell that accompanies the Salton Sea, particularly in warmer months, has a character that visitors describe with a consistency suggesting it is not subtle. And yet, artists have moved in. Bombay Beach, which has a permanent population of a few hundred people and a collection of abandoned trailers and structures, hosts an annual arts festival that brings installation artists and musicians to what is otherwise a landscape of spectacular, melancholy, strangely beautiful ruin. Visitors who make the drive from Los Angeles, about 2.5 hours, describe the place as one of the most otherworldly environments accessible in the American Southwest. California has been debating what to do about the Salton Sea's ecological crisis for decades, with proposals involving restoration, managed retreat, and dust control for the exposed lakebed generating more studies than action. The sea is still there, still below sea level, still accumulating problems, still unlike anywhere else. Number 2. River Country, Walt Disney World, Florida. River Country was Disney's first water park, opening at Walt Disney World in 1976, a year before the Magic Kingdom itself had reached its 5th birthday. The concept was simple, a swimming hole experience in Bay Lake, themed around Tom Sawyer's America, with rope swings, slides, and a section that used actual lake water rather than chlorinated pools, which was an unusual choice that would come up again later. For 25 years, River Country was a beloved component of the Walt Disney World experience. Families who visited in the late 1970s and 1980s remember it specifically. A more relaxed, less structured water park than the ones that would come later, with an atmosphere that felt genuinely casual against the highly orchestrated experience of the main parks. River Country closed in November 2001. The official reason given was seasonal conditions. The closure occurred at the end of summer, and Disney indicated it would reopen in the spring. It never did. No formal announcement was made that River Country was permanently closed. It simply did not reopen, and Disney declined to clarify its status for years, leaving the park in a kind of official ambiguity while it sat visibly abandoned on the shore of Bay Lake, visible to guests staying at the Wilderness Lodge Resort. A Naegleria fowleri, brain-eating amoeba, infection that killed an 11-year-old boy named Michael Horezga, who swam at River Country in 1980, raised serious concerns about the use of untreated lake water in a public swimming attraction, though Disney updated its safety protocols at the time and continued operating. Whether that history was a factor in the decision not to reopen in 2002 has never been officially confirmed by Disney, which maintained its policy of saying essentially nothing about River Country's status for years. For nearly 2 decades, River Country sat abandoned in a way that was genuinely strange for anyone paying attention. It was within clear sight of the active Wilderness Lodge Resort, where guests staying in perfectly normal hotel rooms could look out over Bay Lake and see the decaying slides and overgrown structures of a Disney water park slowly being consumed by Florida vegetation. Disney, which manages its parks and their narratives with extraordinary precision, allowed this visible abandonment to continue for years without formal acknowledgement that the park was gone. In 2019, the company finally confirmed what had been apparent since 2001: River Country would not reopen. Demolition of the remaining structures began in 2021 to prepare the site for a new resort project. The slides are gone. The rope swings are gone. River Country, the water park that Disney never formally said goodbye to, the one that just quietly stopped, is now entirely gone, replaced by whatever comes next on that piece of Bay Lake shoreline. Number 1. Six Flags New Orleans, Louisiana. The park that eventually became Six Flags New Orleans opened in 2000 under the name Jazzland, a New Orleans-themed entertainment complex built on 140 acres in eastern New Orleans. The concept was solid enough. New Orleans had a tourism economy built around its music and culture, and a theme park themed around Louisiana heritage seemed like a reasonable investment. Jazzland operated for 5 years, drew decent crowds, and was acquired by Six Flags Inc. in 2002, which rebranded it and invested in expanding the rides. Then, Hurricane Katrina arrived on August 29, 2005. The storm flooded Six Flags New Orleans under approximately 6 feet of water. The flooding lasted for months. Roller coaster structures, midway buildings, ride mechanisms, and the full infrastructure of an operating theme park sat submerged in polluted floodwater through the fall and winter of 2005 and into 2006. When the water finally receded, what it left behind was not a repairable theme park. It was a salt and sewage-saturated ruin of twisted metal and warped infrastructure. Six Flags made no serious attempt to rebuild. The company, which was already in financial difficulty, formally abandoned the property. The city of New Orleans, which was itself rebuilding, took ownership. And there, at the edge of a great American city that was working to reconstruct itself from one of the worst natural disasters in United States history, a massive, flooded theme park sat in exactly the condition the hurricane had left it. It sat that way for nearly 2 decades. The roller coasters rusted, the carousel frames rusted, the signage faded and fell, graffiti covered every available surface, vegetation moved in. The park became one of the most photographed abandoned sites in the United States, and eventually one of the most filmed. Production companies used it as a location for post-apocalyptic film and television settings, which it suited perfectly without any additional set dressing. "It's the most New Orleans thing imaginable," said one urban explorer who visited the site. "A party that just never ended, and then ended catastrophically." In 2024, after years of ownership disputes, cleanup proposals, stalled development deals, and the particular bureaucratic complexity of clearing 140 acres of flood-damaged, legally contested, asbestos-containing theme park infrastructure in a city that had been managing its own recovery for 2 decades, the city of New Orleans began demolishing the remaining structures at the Six Flags site. The roller coasters that had stood in silent, rusting, graffiti-covered ruin for 19 years came down. The carousel frames came down, the buildings came down, the land was cleared. The park that opened in 2000 as Jazzland was acquired by Six Flags in 2002, was destroyed by Hurricane Katrina in 2005, spent 5 years as an insurance and bankruptcy dispute, spent another decade as a film location and urban exploration destination, and spent the remaining years as a political and financial argument about what eastern New Orleans deserves from its own city government. That park is now, at last, an empty field. What comes next on those 140 acres has been the subject of competing development proposals for years. Whatever it becomes, the ghost of Six Flags New Orleans will be the most famous thing that ever happened on that piece of ground. If this was the kind of history worth your time, hit like and subscribe. There's a lot more of it, and not all of it has been demolished yet.